after we begin the session. Sorry, after we complete the session. So could you all do me a favor and give me a quick yes in the chat button or a no to see just that you can hear us okay. So can you hear me okay? Give me a hi, everybody. Oh, looks like we have good sound. Wonderful. Okay. So then, let's start. Our session is going to be a little bit different from our previous sessions. Because this is an interview session, we'll start with an overview and a short interview between myself and Dr. Tendai Charles. And then we'll start to ask questions that you, our wonderful audience, submitted when you registered for this webinar. And also, if we have time, we'll try and answer your questions from the chat box. And as I said, you'll get a recording after this session. So let me start by introducing Dr. Tendai. So he is, as I said, the director of the Center for Research in Digital Education at BUID. And he has a master's in applied linguistics and TESOL and a PhD in education. And he is taught at world-class institutions such as Edinburgh University, Nottingham University, and Newcastle University. But what makes him a really good person to talk to today is that while we had a guest on Sunday from a very large public college system, I think Dr. Tendai can give us a different story today about a smaller, more private university here in the Gulf. And on a more personal note, I think Dr. Tendai is a particularly good person to talk to, not just because of his extensive experience in research and leadership in technology integration, but because he's also a person who understands deeply what it's like on the ground, so to speak, who understands the realities of technology in the classroom. So please bear with me while I switch our videos over and I give the floor to Dr. Tendai. So here we go, one moment. And thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Tendai. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Well, hello, Pam, and thank you for inviting me to today's session. And hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I think this is a fantastic initiative by Pearson to bring people together during this time with the series of webinars. So thank you very much for the invitation.
Right. So just to start off, could you give us an overview of British University in Dubai's experience over the past very tumultuous month?
Yes, well, just to set some context, the British University in Dubai is relatively a young university, just opened 15 years ago. It's also a very small university in the sense that we only have 1,500 students approximately and less than 40 professors as teachers. So we're quite young, quite small. I myself joined the university in September 2019, and as you highlighted, I'm the director of the Center for Research in Digital Education. So actually back in January, I met with the Vice Chancellor and we discussed a strategy or plan for converting our courses to a blended learning format over the next 4 to 5 years. Obviously, because of this coronavirus situation now, we've been forced into doing this sort of ASAP and not just blended, but actually full 100% online teaching. So it's been a very exciting month. I'm really proud of our institution for taking this bad situation and turning it into a positive experience for everybody. What we've done is looked at best practice around the world and looked at published research before we made any decision, which I think is different to lots of institutions. So friends and colleagues I have working in schools in the area, when I hear about what they're doing at the moment, they're saying things like, well, we need a tool or a software for teaching online, what should we do? And they're thinking very much about apps and technology rather than thinking about the bigger picture. And so you hear lots of people now saying, okay, let's use Zoom. Let's make sure all the students and all the teachers have Zoom and we're done. They can go ahead and teach online. And I'm pretty sure there's a lot of teachers now who are struggling to teach online despite having Zoom. I'm sure there are students who aren't really satisfied with the learning online at the moment. And I'm definitely sure there are parents who are complaining about how teaching and learning is happening right now on the cloud. And I believe that the best way forward is to begin by asking yourself, how do you want your online class to look like? So that's what we did. We had a meeting with all the college deans, all the center directors, and the vice chancellor, and we discussed what we want our online presence to be. So we looked at it from the perspective of management, from the perspective of teachers, and the viewpoint of students. In terms of management, we started off with a distance learning policy document. So we formalized a guidelines for how we want our teachers to teach and how we want our students to study. Just to give a simple example, we have a dress code policy on campus where the professors, we wear suits, and the students, wear sort of smart casual attire. And so we've said, right, so when we're teaching online, we also want our professors to dress appropriately or professionally when teaching at home. And likewise for our students, we've said, well, we don't want you to log on to lesson wearing your pajamas, in bed, with snacks around you. Please sit at a desk. Please be in a suitable environment for studying and for learning. And so we set these guidelines for things like how interaction should happen in the classroom, peer observations of teaching, and many other factors as well. So that's from the management perspective. We then looked at it from the perspective of teachers and students, and we thought what's really important is having a useful learning management system. Now, I'm sure in the audience today, we probably have people from both the K-12 sector and the higher education sector. For those of us in higher education, I think we're all familiar with the LMS system known as Blackboard. And the British University in Dubai did have Blackboard 9 for the past 4 years, I believe, 3 or 4 years. The problem with Blackboard is the user interface is incredibly unfriendly, particularly for academics or teachers who are not tech savvy. If you think, for example, of Photoshop, when you first have somebody use Photoshop who's not tech savvy, they get overwhelmed by all of the options available on the screen. Or if you think about video editing and using something like Camtasia, which is quite user-friendly and easy compared to Final Cut Pro with much more options, people get overwhelmed when they see these things. So with the Blackboard learning management system, we felt that the interface wasn't really suitable. Now, there's a competitor management system known as Canvas. And over the past 5 to 6 years in America, 9 out of the 10 top universities converted from Blackboard to Canvas because the Canvas user interface was much more accessible and user-friendly for both teachers and for students. So we actually ran a research study. We invited both Blackboard and Canvas to our campus, and they delivered presentations showing us how to use their software. And Blackboard actually surprised us with their new version called Blackboard Ultra, which just was released last year. And so actually they learned from Canvas and simplified their user interface. So Blackboard has amazing features, but the interface was horrible. And Canvas has less features, but the interface was more user-friendly. Blackboard now improved their interface, so it's actually more intuitive than Canvas's interface. And we ran a survey with our teachers, and they all preferred the Blackboard Ultra experience. And so we actually upgraded just this month, and we felt that really helped everybody. So it's been a very exciting time. There's lots of transitioning happening, lots of changes, but we're all enjoying it and staying positive.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story about your choice of learning management system. Institutions that had a learning management system that faculty were comfortable with certainly had an easier time making the switch from face-to-face learning to distance learning. And you did mention how the pace of a shift toward blended learning has been accelerated by our current circumstances with COVID-19. But can you tell me in a little bit more detail how faculty were prepared? It was over a couple of days, really, right? How the faculty made that switch at British University?
Yeah, well, when you think about our professors, most of them are actually in their 50s. So they spent 25 years of their lives studying in a traditional face-to-face format. And then they spent around 25 years teaching in a very traditional format. And now we're saying, okay, guys, we want you to teach online. So it's very much a shock to the system and a completely new experience for all of them. So what we've tried to do is simplify the process as much as possible by providing training. So I designed a series of micro-learning courses. So micro-learning, if people aren't aware, is a pedagogical approach for teaching online where you create a series of short videos. Like you might have seen LinkedIn Learn, or I believe Coursera and edX.org have these MOOCs available, these massive online open courses where you can study watching short 4 to 5 minute videos and then do some activities thereafter. So I designed some training for our faculty to teach them how to lesson plan for online classes, how to do group work activities online, how to make sure the experience is engaging for students. Again, because many of our faculty are used to teaching in the traditional format and their professors, they would tend to just talk to students for an hour or 2 hours, which is obviously different to teachers in the K-12 sector. And actually, in my opinion, I think teachers in the K-12 sector and TESOL teachers are often better at teaching than academics are. And the reason I say that, let's take a person who studies psychology. So they've done an undergraduate degree in psychology, and then a master's degree in psychology, and then a PhD in psychology. And then they're told, okay, now go and teach students about psychology. So they have a lot of content knowledge. They know the field of psychology really well. But in terms of how to teach psychology, they had never studied the pedagogy behind that. So I find that teachers in the K-12 sector have usually gone through some sort of teacher training program. Similarly, TESOL instructors have done something like a CELTA or Delta. So they've had training of how to teach, which is very different to faculty. So we've been taking faculty right from the beginning on how to think about what pedagogy should look like in the classroom, but also in the online environment. So besides the micro-learning course, we just provide one-to-one support. Again, because we're a small institution, we can actually meet with people one-to-one, whether it be online or over the phone, and just guide them through the process of teaching online.
Thank you for that. I think it's interesting that you took a micro-learning approach to this SNAP professional development initiative to prepare teachers for this very fast transition. So if I can ask you one more question or a couple more questions about the recent shift to distance learning. For example, in our face-to-face classes, let's say a teacher is teaching a 2-hour block with the same section every day. Now, at your university, about how much time of that 2-hour block is synchronous with the teacher and students together in a video conference, and how much of that time is asynchronous with teachers assigning projects for students to complete, not necessarily inside a 2-hour block? Can you give us a little bit of idea of async and synchronous time and how it's spent?
Yes, well, actually what we did was give our teachers the choice to run their courses either 100% synchronous or 100% asynchronous, or to combine between the two. So I myself, I teach in an asynchronous format. So I design, I create videos and activities, and I upload them to our Blackboard Ultra system. And students can work through them at their own pace. So actually, I'm not actually online with students at the same time when I teach Pearson. But I do have colleagues who teach in a synchronous format, and they are online using Blackboard Ultra, which is like Zoom, and they're online with the students face-to-face for the whole time. What's great about that is there's functions in there which allow them to group the students into their own smaller groups, let's say. So if we have a class of 20 students, we can say, okay, we're going to have groups of 5, and they can go off in those groups and work collaboratively or something, and then come back together. So they may not be 100% for the 2 hours face-to-face with each student. They may assign an activity and give students 20 minutes to go off in their little groups, work on those tasks, and then come back together. And then there may be another 10 to 15 minutes of instruction, and then students may go off again and work on a task, come back together. What we do do at the university, the British University in Dubai, is everybody has to submit their lesson plans and their teaching materials to our quality assurance officer, and she checks to make sure that the lesson plan looks like we're doing enough during our 2-hour slot, or in my case, over the period of a week, to make sure students are engaged with activities that are reasonable. And we need to make sure that it's not too much work as well, because when you're teaching online, there's the potential of giving students too much work, rather than making it fair and giving them what they're due for that particular week.
Thank you for that. And it's interesting that teachers had a choice to do what was most comfortable for them. You know, a lot of teachers can be completely asynchronous, but, you know, other teachers really aren't ready for it, for creating all of the content that goes into making an asynchronous session really successful. So thank you for sharing that. Um, what are you, and let's say, could you also answer for British University, what are you doing for exam security right now in this time of distance learning?
Yes, so because we use the Blackboard Ultra system, there's a built-in safer sign
Mhm.
and a lockdown browser. So when students are doing exams online, the browser's locked and they can't go and look elsewhere on the web for answers. So I know lots of people doing that. On my course, so I teach on the Masters in Education program, there are no exams actually. Students write essays. And so I don't personally need to lock down the browser or anything like that. But when I do give students quizzes, I give them formative assessment quizzes. And so there's no grade attached to their final mark in the end. So if they're doing a quiz and there's 30 questions and they score 100%, that doesn't count towards their final grade. It's really just a concept check. But I do know faculty in computer science and in engineering, they are doing tests and they use a lockdown browser for that.
I think that for the last few weeks, I've been hearing a lot about exam security concerns from teachers in both higher ed and schools. And I think, let's see, one issue that was brought up by our colleague Gina Carlin at University of Dubai was that even when you're using something like the lockdown browser, we still don't know what the student is doing in front of the computer. We don't really have an assurance that the learner isn't recording the let's see, the test or the questions in some other way. So one other tool that our previous speaker, Sarah Whitaker, mentioned was called Lockdown Browser with Monitor. So for all of the participants today who are really concerned about exam security, I think that doing formative assessment, just as Tendai said, can be extremely helpful, and it can help you spot anomalies between difference between a student's formative assessment scores and then finally their exam scores. And yeah, so I hope that is a helpful tip.
I
Yes.
would just add to that, that I think, realistically speaking, students are always going to find a way to get around the system. I remember back when I was in high school and students were cheating in high school exams, and that was face to face. And an example that was for GCSE high school, and now they're still going to find ways. I remember a few years ago I was administering an IELTS exam, and we had some students use the AirPods that Apple provided, and they would sit they wear a shader and or a hijab, and so it's in their ear, and you cannot see them, and they listen. So students will always be very clever and find a way to get around the system and to cheat, unfortunately. I think that's a reality, particularly when we're teaching online, and we're all new to teaching online now as well. So I think that's going to be there, unfortunately, to an extent. And we could just do our best to try and deal with that however we can.
Indeed, and I think one of the things that we could do to avoid students copying sort of single item questions to groups of friends on WhatsApp and whatever is to demand more of students in terms of critical thinking and personal perspective. And instead of assessments where a student has to choose A, B, or C or fill in the gap, an assessment that requires the student to engage in original thought or critical thinking and an informed perspective are probably in this time of distance learning the way to go.
I
So
agree with that 100%. And I think that because we are teaching online now, we need to think of new ways to teach rather than how we normally teach in a face-to-face lesson. And similarly, in terms of assessment, we should be thinking of new ways to assess students online rather than traditional ways. So that sounds like a fantastic idea, maybe giving students project work or other creative ways to assess them rather than using traditional multiple choice tests.
thanks for that. So one more question before we move on to participants' question are what in the past month has been either, you can answer as your personal biggest challenge with the switch to distance learning, or the biggest challenge you've observed at your university?
I think the biggest challenge really has been training students on how to study online. See, we have this misconception that students are good with technology because they're young. And actually, the students also think they're really good at technology because they hear their parents say to them, "Oh, you're so good at technology." When actually, kids are good at taking photos and editing videos and playing games. But if you give them tasks to do for studying online collaboratively, they're not familiar on how to use those tools and they're not good at that. So we've been trying to train our students in study skills for online learning, which has been a challenge because most of us, at least in my context, haven't studied online. We may have taught online to some extent, but not studied online. And so we've had to do research to find out what the best study skills are for students. That's one side. On the other hand, it's been for faculty who are not tech savvy, it's been a challenge for them to adapt to this online teaching and just visualizing what an online class should look like. So again, you can give workshops and give advice, but people need to see it and experience it to really understand what it means. And so what we've been doing in our policy document is making sure that there's some sort of mentoring system for our teachers. So we have observations during the semester, and we mentor them and advise them on how they can tweak their teaching and to reflect on their practice at the moment. So those have been the main challenges at the moment, and we'll see what happens during the rest of the semester.
Thank you for that. So now we're going to move on to the section of this session, the part of this session, where we answer the questions that you, our participants, have submitted before we began today. So the first question I'd like to pose is from Dries, and she asks, or he asks, I'm afraid I don't know, how to adapt your teaching methods according to students' age group and with regards to distance teaching.
I think when we're teaching online, older students can study more independently than younger learners can. And so if we're dealing with teenagers, 14, 15 and above, I think you're able to teach in the way I described earlier, where in a synchronous lesson, you can start off with the students face-to-face, give them some instruction, and then just leave them to work independently for half an hour or so, and just monitor their progress whilst they're studying independently, and then bring them back together and continue with some instruction. Because I think with the younger learners, they need more scaffolding, they need more support, and I think it needs to be maybe more teacher-led for them.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question. This is an interesting one about teacher qualifications. This is from Deborah from PMU in Saudi Arabia. More and more EFL instructors are expected to have MA TESOLs, and yet we have all known or know instructors who don't have them who are very good. Those of us who have them know that we don't use all that we studied in our classrooms. Additionally, getting a master's can be quite expensive in some countries. Are there alternatives that can gain recognition? And is there a future for the EFL instructor without a TESOL degree?
Very interesting question there. I think I would say that you don't need an MA to be a great teacher, that's for sure. But in terms of long-term in your career, you probably do need an MA to get a great job. That's how I look at it. So I did an MA in Applied Linguistics and TESOL at Newcastle University. It was a fantastic experience. And I learned a lot about language acquisition and the way in which students learn a second language. But in terms of actual teaching practice, I didn't really learn anything from that. So after the master's, I did a CELTA course, and that's really where I learned about how to teach English in the classroom. And so potentially you can find someone with a bachelor's degree who has a CELTA, and then even the Delta, the next qualification thereafter, and they may be very experienced and a better teacher than someone who's a fresh MA holder with no teaching experience. However, nowadays, the TESOL industry is so saturated, there's so much competition when you apply for jobs that employers definitely, because I've been part of the recruitment process, employers definitely say, okay, these are the MA holders in this pile when looking at CVs, and these are the bachelor degree holders. And they always prefer the MA holders, to be honest. So I would definitely advise people to do an MA, even if it's part-time online, it takes a couple of years or something. But I think you really do need an MA for longevity in the career.
Thank you for answering that. I have another kind of challenging question from Hanan at Misr International University. And Hanan asks, at this hard time, how can we motivate staff members to invest their time in developing their own skills while being entangled with the tremendous workload of following online classes?
Honestly, I think during this time, we really need to show some support to our teachers and some compassion. You know, the whole world is on lockdown right now. Emotionally, you know, I've got friends and colleagues who have relatives who have passed away due to coronavirus. And I think they're already under a lot of pressure anyway. I don't think we should be demanding on them in terms of their professional development. In fact, I would say, if you think about David Kolb's experiential learning theory, I think right now, teachers being forced to teach online, that is in and of itself is a type of professional development anyway. So I would say just let the teachers deal with and cope with teaching online now, and just manage that for the next few months. And then let's revisit other ways for developing staff further, other professional development options.
Thanks for that. Let's go on to the next question. This is one that I think a lot of people have in mind. So this is from Nasri at University of Sciences and Arts in Lebanon. And Nasri asks, most of our students do not have laptops. They use their mobile devices instead. Apparently, watching a mobile for learning is so stressful because of the small screen. How to overcome such difficulty?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I know lots of students or children in general, or teenagers, if you put Netflix on their phone, they can watch an entire series for 10 hours straight. Or you put YouTube on there, they can watch it for hours straight. You can give them a game they like PUBG or Candy Crush, they can play that for 4 hours straight. If they've got TikTok or Instagram, they can use that for hours on end. And then after 20 minutes of studying in your class, they complain about eye strain, which I find interesting. But no, there are obviously health issues when it comes to staying at the screen for so long. And so I would say that it's upon parents really to buy the equipment that their kids need for studying online. So as a teacher, it's not your responsibility, to be concerned so much about the device. If anything, you can give advice to your parents in the community and say, listen, please go ahead and buy laptops or desktop PCs for your kids so they can study in a way which is healthy, safe for their eyesight. But yeah, this idea that they cannot actually sit for long hours with an iPhone or some sort of mobile device, I disagree
with. Thank you for that. Okay, another question. Let's see. Scrolling through. Okay, this is from Islam at Arab International School. And Islam asks, how do I develop my administration skills of education leadership?
I think with leadership skills and administration skills, it comes through practice and experience. It's not really something that you can learn, as far as I can tell. What I would recommend for people is to take initiative at your school or your university, try to lead some sort of project, and then through that experience, you'll learn more about administration skills and leadership skills. I mean, just from today's seminar, there's been lots of things we've discussed. We've spoken about a distance learning policy, for example, for online teaching. We've spoken about professional development training for teachers who are not used to teaching online. So I know often in staff rooms, teachers complain a lot that, oh, the problem here is the administrator, the problem here is the vice principal, the problem here is the head of the department. Often, teachers talk about problems, but not really solutions. But you can be the person in your institution who comes up with solutions for these problems, approaches the principal or vice chancellor or the management and say, well, listen, I've got an idea on how we can deal with this problem. Can I lead this project? And 9 times out of 10, managers are happy for someone to do some work for them. So you'll have opportunities there to gain some experience through administration.
Yeah, and I think positivity helps. I think instead of pointing out a problem, saying you have an idea and a solution to the problem. And unfortunately, I think it takes walking into everybody's office, calling meetings, sending emails, but yeah, pushing forward that those solutions ends up being the way forward and the way you can find the change that you need. So let's take a look at another question. This is from Wafa at Bataji Medical College. Wafa asks, what is the impact of implementation of online learning in courses designed to be face-to-face teaching on curriculum design?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And it relates to an article I read recently about online peer observations. So, for years we've been doing peer observations in the classroom, and now we want to actually observe teachers when they're teaching online. How should we observe them? According to what criteria? Obviously, teaching online is different to teaching in the classroom. And so also for the syllabus as well. So most of our syllabi are designed for face-to-face lessons. We need to rethink them so we can use them online work. I mentioned earlier micro-learning as one pedagogical approach towards teaching, and there's several others as well. And so I'd recommend that people investigate those further. There's a very well-known model within the field of education technology known as the TPAC model, which I find really useful and a point I always go back to, which basically says an outstanding teacher is going to have strong content knowledge, so they know the topic they're teaching. If you're a TESOL teacher, you know English well. If you're a mathematics teacher, you know mathematics well. So they know their content knowledge. They should also have adequate pedagogical knowledge, which is how to teach their content. So for me, as a former English teacher, I know that the task-based language teaching approach is one of the most effective ways to teach English based on the research published in my area. So for somebody teaching mathematics or psychology, they should know the most appropriate ways of teaching their particular content. And then the last thing we should think about is technology and how technology can be used to teach or to support my pedagogical approach for teaching the content I want to teach. And so I think schools should be using this model, and universities should be using this model now to reflect upon how they're teaching and how they can move forward teaching in the future.
Thanks for that. A few questions have come in about how, let's see, the first one is from Fatah at University of Cairo in Saudi Arabia. And Fatah asks, how can I deal with an internet connection problem? And I think we also have a question on this theme in our chat right now. Do you have any advice for institutions and students who have internet connection issues?
Yes. So personally, I mentioned earlier that I teach asynchronously. And one of the reasons I do that is because I've been teaching blended learning now for about 6 years. And I find that sometimes students are living in an area where the internet is slow. And so when you're teaching a synchronous lesson in real time, they have connection issues. Or it could be that just in your institution or your own area, the bandwidth from the internet at that time could be heavy, and so you get connection problems. So one of the reasons I prefer asynchronous teaching is that I can upload all my content to Blackboard, or you can upload it to your own learning management system. And then students can access the material in their own time, and they can download it to their devices or their laptops in their own time and view it then. And so if you're living in an area or working in a community where people are struggling with connection problems, I would say don't teach in real time, try to minimize that, and try to spend more time teaching asynchronously. Or if you're in a context where you're told, well, no, you have to face the students, maybe start the lesson synchronously, as I described earlier, and then switch to an asynchronous format, if that's possible.
Thanks, Tendai. I think the time for us to move over to address questions that are coming in while we're talking today has arrived. And so I think that you answered in the course of this discussion a question we have about test security. So Fatima, thanks for your question. I'm going to actually say that I think we've addressed that so far. If you have any further questions, please just put it in the chat. And so we're moving toward Aya from Kuwait English School now. And she asked, how can we manage the time if students are traveling in and out of places all over the world? What advice would you give, Aya?
Sorry, I misunderstood the question. Students are traveling somewhere?
How can we manage the time if the students are traveling and they're in places all around the world and in different time zones?
I see. I imagine that she means how do we teach a real-time lesson and students are different areas in the world. Okay. So again, I mean, if you're in a context where you're teaching students from across the globe and you're finding difficulty in bringing them all together at the same time for a synchronous lesson, simply switch to an asynchronous format. I'll say something that's important here. Online teaching isn't something that's really new, to be honest. If we look at the Open University in the UK, they've been teaching online courses now for about 15 years. If you look at some universities in America, like Brigham Young University, they've been teaching online for about a decade now. And so there are lots of, well, not lots, but there are some examples around the world of institutions who have been teaching either 100% online for a period of time or blended learning courses for a period of time. And so what we did at the British University in Dubai is we looked at their best practice and basically took points from them to apply to our own context. And even if you look at platforms like edX.org or FutureLearn or Coursera, these are all platforms which provide MOOCs, massive online open courses. And so you can actually register for some of these courses and have a look at best practice and what's happening at the moment, and then apply them to your own context as well.
Thanks for that. So Nabil has made an observation, though it's not exactly a question, but this is a little sad. Some parents started posing questions that if our kids are being taught online through your university, it would have been better to enroll them in more prestigious universities than yours. That sounds like a very unkind thing to say for those parents. How can you respond to Nabil? Can you reassure Nabil?
Yeah, I'm not sure what to, well, okay, here's what I'll say, is I strongly believe that what's important is the teacher and the content being taught more so than the institution's reputation. Particularly the higher you go up in academia or in studies. So if we're talking about university students here, I'm not sure if these students are undergrad level or master's degree or PhD, but ultimately, in the end, they're going to get a degree from a university where they chose initially, I believe. And so I think it's a very controversial topic to say that this university is better than that one. I should have gone there instead at this point. I'm just happy that we're still able to teach online. Students are still learning during this horrible period of time.
Yeah, and I think that there is a silver lining here. I think that all of the effort that all of us make toward making distance learning a success in this, finite time, this effort will pay off for all of us and our students in the future. And many of us have just learned that we will be using distance learning until the end of the academic year. But these universities will revert to face-to-face learning. That learning will probably be more facilitated by technology in the future. But right, bright side.
Yeah, that's a valid point. I mean, here in the United Arab Emirates, the Ministry of Education has just issued a decree basically saying that everybody, all schools and universities have to complete this academic year online. And so what we're doing at our university is we want some sustainability. So we're looking well beyond this. When we go back to teaching face-to-face, we want to continue having blended learning courses and online courses to an extent. And so we're really trying to learn from this experience now to make sure that we can continue to teach well in the future. I do know that for teachers who lack the confidence to teach online right now, maybe the quality of their teaching is going to be subpar, not as good as they usually teach. But we should be patient with them and show some compassion and support during this time, because it's difficult for all of us, to be honest.
Right, I like what you say about patience and compassion. I don't know if you can see it in your chat box, but Benson has just mentioned that the greatest challenge that he has seen over the last 3 weeks is that teachers are overwhelmed with pressure from both management and students. Management want delivery, but are not always able to give sufficient support to the teacher, and students give excuses such as I don't have internet or I didn't see the quiz. So how best can a teacher cope with so much pressure?
Yeah, I really, as a teacher myself, I really support teachers during this time because I know it's really hard for teachers, even without the coronavirus, even just teaching normally, particularly teachers in the K-12 sector. In my own experience, I teach at university level. All of my students are adults, and so it's a completely different environment. I can talk to them, I can give them tasks to do, and they go off and do it. Whereas you compare that to teachers in the K-12 sector, particularly teaching teenagers going through their hormones and their transitions. They find excuses in normal face-to-face classes anyway not to do work, and you're dealing with much more behavior management issues anyway. And now they have the excuse of being at home, they can claim the internet. I think we just need to show some support to the teachers during this time, and just to say, just keep going through, don't give up, and hopefully we want next academic year a stronger and better experience.
Yeah, thank you for that good advice. And I think whenever I see a teacher who's really distressed, I always tend to remind them it's temporary.
Absolutely.
So, right. Let's see. We have another chat coming up about Blackboard and tests and avoiding cheating. And actually, I know we addressed this in some detail at the beginning of this session. So right now, what I will say is that I will do another webinar devoted to the avoidance of cheating or dishonesty next week. I believe it's scheduled for Tuesday, but I can give you more information about that session when I email everybody, all of our participants, the link to this recording after the end of this session. So let's take another look at the chat. I think we have time for maybe a couple more. So, let's see.
But just on that point of Blackboard, for those of you who are using Blackboard, I'm assuming it's probably one of the first times you're using it quite heavily. I'd recommend using the adaptive release function, which is really helpful if you want to differentiate learning in the classrooms. And maybe other LMS systems have something similar too. Normally when we teach in a face-to-face context, we differentiate between the strong and weak students. Now in online classes, I think this is something that's been forgotten. But the adaptive release function can be used for that. And so when students are performing well on the tests, they're given more difficult and challenging questions. And if they're performing quite weakly or not so well, they're given easier questions in a different learning path. That's just a tip for you there.
Thank you for that. And I think adaptive release kind of works best if you have quite a rich test bank, right? If you have a lot of questions already and that you've already coded them by difficulty level. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that is very good advice as far as using adaptive release. I would say if I could add to your answer, Dr. Tendai, I would also say that using randomization options of both questions and distractors might be helpful.
Yes.
And I think I'll reprise a previous comment about creating an assessment that requires a student to think independently and critically might be our way forward as far as if you're not ready to have your test bank photographed and put on WhatsApp.
Yes, that's valid. And I like this point of randomization as well, because potentially, even if you use the lockdown browser, when the student's taking a test online, they could have a relative, a younger brother or sister, somewhere in the corner with their iPhone out, zoomed in, recording the screen. And so they can see what questions are there and they can share it on WhatsApp or something. With randomizing the questions, hopefully that minimizes that to some extent. But realistically, we do need to look at other ways of assessing students online.
Okay. So we are getting to the end of our session. So we're about to wind down. And thank you to everyone who has submitted a lot of really thoughtful questions. And let's take one more from the chat, and then we'll do our final wrap up. So Dr. Tendai, can you give us a list of a few apps that have been helpful to you in the past month, other than Blackboard?
Yeah, okay. So again, I really want to highlight the point of thinking more about pedagogy and less about technology. So thinking about why you're teaching in a particular way, and if there's any research that supports that way of teaching, and if there's any research that suggests another way of teaching which is better, rather than just getting stuck on different tools. Having said that, I am a proponent of Google Drive for online collaboration. And so if you want students, for example, to work together collaboratively on an essay or preparing a presentation or something, you can have them all use Google Docs or Google Slides or Google Sheets. They have the suite of tools, which is like Microsoft Office, but it's cloud-based, and it works really well in real time. I think Office 365 also has a real-time option, but when I tested it, it was very slow, and it didn't have the same speeds that you had in Google Drive. And so that's something I'd recommend people to give a try. And you can also embed anything you make in Google into your own learning management system, whether you're using Moodle or Canvas or Blackboard or something else completely different. You can embed things in there. And a friend of mine has actually started to make Google Sites, as I don't think his school has an LMS. So he uses Google Sites and basically puts all his course materials in there, and it's embedded directly in the website. So I would definitely recommend Google Drive. It's a free tool that we all have. If you have Gmail, you have Google Drive. So that's something to look into.
Thanks, and I'll reinforce your recommendation for Google Drive or OneDrive or actually any platform that allows multiple people to collaborate and contribute into the same project or document. So the final question, and this is what we'll close out today. You can answer either for yourself personally or for your institution, Dr. Tendai. What has been your greatest victory this past month, and what is your way forward?
I think for me, it's been a sense of community, particularly in universities. Academics, we work in our silos. Everyone's got their own office. And, we're working on research projects, and we don't really come together much. But now having to switch to an online teaching format, everyone's really come together to try to work out how can we deal with the situation, how can we ensure we're teaching students effectively and meaningfully. And so just the sense of community we've had at my institution has been wonderful. And even cross institutions, I've had colleagues from previous jobs who've contacted me about how to go about teaching online. And so we've connected people together, which has been really well. And so I would actually say to the community here today, all of us working in the Gulf, we're one team. We've got one group of students. We should all be working together. And so don't suffer in silence alone. Like, feel free to reach out to people. Pam has been great in bringing us together in this webinar series. I myself, you can find me on LinkedIn or my university's website. You can feel free to contact me to collaborate on research projects or anything. I can give you some advice about how to design your own discipline policy, for example. I think it's just a time where you should be getting together with other teachers from other institutions and collaborating to really try to help our students and even ourselves during this period of time.
That is a beautiful thought to conclude with today, that thought of community, where we can help each other solve the challenges, the very special challenges that we encounter today. Dr. Tendai, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us such thoughtful answers to all of these questions from our participants. So one more thing before we go, everyone. Let me just switch my screen for a moment here. I mentioned that I would be doing some more work later next week. So next week, we'll be talking about professional development and in technology for this distance learning time. We will also talk we will have another session completely devoted, the hour devoted to a discussion of assessment and exam security for distance learning. And so I'll send you all the link to this session, this session's recording, and I'll send you a follow-up email for future events. So thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you are always learning, and I'll be in touch soon. Thank you again, Dr. Tendai. That's the end of this session. Thank you, everyone. I'll hang out if you have any more questions, but this session has concluded. Thank you.